1983. The highest-grossing film that year was Star Wars Episode VI: Return of the Jedi. The television industry gave us Fraggle Rock on HBO. The finale of MASH garnered over 125 million viewers. ABC pulled the plug on Laverne and Shirley after 8 seasons. Tale of the Century made its return to NBC with host Jim Perry. Alvin and the Chipmunks made its debut on NBC. Press Your Luck debuted on CBS not long afterwards. PBS gave us Reading Rainbow, The Joy of Painting, and a new season of 3-2-1 Contact. Michael Jackson introduced the moonwalk. That same year, his Thriller music video debuted on MTV, and his Thriller album became the best-selling album of all time. Phone company AT&T was founded. Pioneer 10 passed Neptune's orbit. Meanwhile, in the video game industry, Nintendo launched the Family Computer, or Famicom, in Japan. Sega launched the SG-1000. In North America, the video game market was crashing, despite games like Dragon's Lair making their debut in arcades. Meanwhile, before their Famicom was released in Japan, Nintendo released the follow-up to their Donkey Kong arcade games. This game, along with its Game & Watch version, established a new character in the franchise who started out as a palette swap with the protagonist. The arcade game also established the concept of collecting coins. This year, the game turns 40 years old. In honor of this event, Gaming Delight presents the story of Mario Brothers. To better understand Mario Brothers, let's look back at the arcade game that brought Mario to life, Donkey Kong. Released in 1981, Donkey Kong was a huge success. Over 130,000 arcade cabinets were sold, and the game generated over $280 million in about a year. In 1982, Nintendo followed up with the sequel, Donkey Kong Jr., which, while not as successful as its predecessor, sold over 30,000 arcade cabinets in the United States alone. I'd bring up Donkey Kong 3, but that game didn't come out until October 21st, 1983, after Mario Brothers. With the success of Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., Shigeru Miyamoto, along with Donkey Kong's producer Gunpei Yokoi, began working on another follow-up, only this time with Mario as the star, and with a whole new career. They discovered that their Donkey Kong games lacked one compelling feature: 2-player co-op. Inspired by the classic Williams Electronics arcade game Joust, Miyamoto and Yokoi decided to implement 2-player co-op into the new game. With this new idea came another question: if Mario was player 1, who was to be player 2? For design, they simply copied Mario, but gave him a palette swap. The next thing to give him was a name. He was given the name Luigi. But how? In an interview with Famitsu.com, Miyamoto stated, "That name was actually given by the American team as a contrast to Mario." And so, Mario's younger brother Luigi officially came into existence. In addition, in Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., when the protagonist fell from high places, you'd lose a life. Yokoi decided to remove that from the new game. At first, Miyamoto had his doubts, thinking it wouldn't be much of a game. But then, according to an Iwata Ask interview, he thought, why shouldn't Mario be able to perform some superhuman feats? He ultimately went along with Yokoi's suggestion. The duo came up with a prototype for the game, adding platforms, also taking inspiration from Joust. But while they found it fun, they ran into a snag. What would the game be like? Yokoi suggested defeating the enemies by hitting them from beneath the floor they're standing on. But then, he and Miyamoto found it too easy. They soon changed it to flipping the enemies to stun them, then jumping onto the same platform to take them out. As for the enemies, one idea they came up with was a turtle, later to be named the Shell Creeper. Miyamoto had suggested the turtle, since its unbreakable shell would protect them from immediate death, and only leave them temporarily stunned if hit. As for the background, to go along with the slippery platforms, Miyamoto added sewage pipes, which enemies and coins would pop out of. He got this inspiration from a subterranean network of sewage pipes, as well as pipes used in numerous manga. According to Iwata Asks, he stated, "If you read old comic books, there will always be waste ground with pipes lying around. To make the pipes more distinct, Miyamoto wanted to give them a green color to match the turtles, rather than gray. But it couldn't be done with a single tone, so he joined two tones together to make the pipes green. With this new setting also came a new career for Mario. In Donkey Kong, he was depicted as a carpenter, but for this game, Miyamoto, once again inspired by manga, decided to turn Mario into a plumber. The music would be composed by Yukio Kaneoka, known for his work in previous Nintendo arcade titles dating all the way back to Donkey Kong. Sound effects would be designed by Hirokazu Tanaka. If Tanaka's name sounds familiar to you, there's a good reason. He would go on to become a composer for numerous games for Nintendo. Donkey Kong 3 was his first composition. As the development of Mario Bros. Neared completion, Nintendo released a Game & Watch game of the same name, but with different gameplay. On March 14th, 1983, the Mario Bros. Game & Watch hit store shelves. This is where Luigi officially makes his debut. This game can also be played with 2 players. This horizontal multi-screen handheld game has you controlling Mario on the right screen and Luigi on the left as you help them package bottles and load them into a delivery truck. Mario takes a box from a machine and places it on the bottom conveyor belt. As it moves between screens, 2 bottles are loaded into the box. Luigi grabs the package and places it on a higher conveyor belt, and 2 more bottles are loaded. The process repeats until the boxes are filled with bottles and perfectly sealed, at which point, Luigi grabs the box from the topmost conveyor belt and loads it into the truck. As they progress, more boxes pop out of the machine for the Mario Brothers to load. Once 8 packages are loaded, the truck drives away, and Mario and Luigi take a break before the whole cycle starts over again. If a box falls to the floor before reaching the truck, your boss yells at you. Lose 3 boxes and it's game over. The game gets faster over time. 1 point is scored for each time Mario or Luigi successfully moves a box from one conveyor belt to the next, and an additional point is scored for each time Luigi loads the truck with a package. Once the truck's fully loaded, 10 bonus points are awarded. Reaching 300 points clears all misses, but doing so without any misses doubles the points, until a miss is made. Like I said earlier, the Mario Bros. Game & Watch is different from the actual arcade game. There are no enemies whatsoever and no one to rescue, just Mario and Luigi loading a truck. So what made Mario get out of carpentry and into this job before getting into plumbing? Well, here's my theory. In Donkey Kong Jr., after Donkey Kong is rescued by his son, Mario is so humiliated he loses his job as a carpenter and decides to work in a bottle packing plant, and his brother Luigi volunteers to help him. But all this work eventually puts too much of a strain on them, causing them to subsequently quit this job and take up plumbing. Supposedly. I'm not quite sure. Back to the arcade game. In March of 1983, Nintendo of America presented Mario Bros. At the Amusement Operators Expo in Chicago, Illinois. Within the next few months, Mario Bros. Officially launched in arcades across North America and Japan. Let's go over the game itself. Player 1 controls Mario, and in 2-player mode, Player 2 controls Luigi. As stated earlier, to take out an enemy, you have to jump underneath the platform they're standing on to knock them temporarily unconscious. This gives you the chance to jump onto that same platform and kick them off and deep into the sewers. Each enemy you take out and each coin you collect gives you 800 points. If you beat an enemy within a second of beating the last, you get 1600 points instead, 2400 for a third, and 3200 for a fourth and beyond. Enemies include the Shell Creeper Turtles, the Sidestepper Crabs, which take 2 hits to knock down, the constantly bouncing Fighter Flies, the floating red and green fireballs, hanging icicles that can only be destroyed before they take full shape, and the slip ice that self-destruct to freeze platforms. On the lower center of the screen, there's a POW block, which you can use to knock down every enemy in sight, or bring them back to their feet. Hit it wisely if you wish to perform a high-scoring combo. It'll only take 3 hits before it's gone, though it will refresh occasionally. Periodically, you get to play a bonus stage to collect 10 coins in a fixed amount of time. For instance, you have 20 seconds to gather all the coins after the first levels. Every bonus stage afterwards has a 15-second time limit. As usual, you get 800 points per coin, but if you collect them all in time, you receive bonus points. 5,000 for the first bonus stage, and 8,000 for each bonus stage afterwards. The platforms on the second bonus stage are frozen, giving you more of a challenge. Afterwards, every bonus stage has invisible platforms. Not that it'll do you any worse if you know the platform layout like the back of your own hands. Upon release, Mario Bros. Became a modest success. By the end of 1983, almost 4,000 cabinets were sold in North America alone. Of course, 1983 was also the year of the infamous video game crash in North America, but that didn't stop Mario Bros. From making waves. It officially established Luigi as a mainstay in the Mario franchise, and the brothers' occupation as plumbers. The game was popular enough to receive ports on many a console, including the Family Computer, or Famicom. While I'd love to talk about all of the ports of Mario Bros., I'm going to focus on those for the Famicom/NES, Atari's home consoles, and the Game Boy Advance. Some historians say that Mario Bros. Was made with the intent of being ported to the Famicom with little to no compromises. It makes sense, considering the Famicom was in the final development stages while Shigeru Miyamoto, Gunpei Yokoi, and their team were developing Mario Bros. The port was released in Japan on September 9, 1983, 2 months after the Famicom was released. Among the compromises, Nintendo removed the cutscenes in between levels and simplified the enemies' animations. They also shrunk down the fireballs and got rid of the icicles. The Mario Bros. Clothes are also different from the arcade version. Mario's hat is now red instead of blue. Luigi's overalls are still green, but his shirt and hat are white instead of darker green for the shirt and bright green for the hat. As for the bonus stages, they show up in different levels, and there are no invisible floors. All of these were to get around the Famicom's hardware limitations. Despite these sacrifices, the Famicom port is impressive. Almost 3 years later, it was released in North America under the Arcade Classics label for the nationwide rollout of the Nintendo Entertainment System. North American gamers wouldn't see a home port of Mario Bros. Until late in 1983 on the Atari 2600. But before we get to that port, let's go through a little more history. Sometime before the Famicom launched in Japan, having licensed Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. to Atari for release on home computers, Nintendo turned to Atari about distributing the Famicom outside of Japan. Atari thought it a good idea. While the Atari 2600 was still making waves, the company thought it was time to move on. But their latest console, the Atari 5200, was a massive flop. A library consisting mostly of enhanced ports of already released games, a lack of original games, controllers with non-centering analog joysticks, and a hefty initial price tag turned off many consumers. Atari felt distributing the Famicom was a fair option. It would make both Nintendo and Atari a lot of money. To further foster the relationship, Atari asked Nintendo to port 4 of the games they licensed. The two companies expected to ship the system by the 1983 holiday season. However, in June of 1983, at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, Atari approached Nintendo in fury, having seen Coleco showing off Donkey Kong on their new Atom, a home computer that could be purchased standalone or as an add-on for the ColecoVision. The Atom could also play cartridges. Atari CEO Ray Kassar, who had been spearheading the deal, held up negotiations on the Famicom deal until Nintendo could get the debacle out of the way. Not long afterwards, Nintendo granted Atari the license to port Mario Bros. To their platforms, which Atari announced on June 15th. After a meeting with Coleco, Nintendo managed to resolve the problem by disallowing Coleco to show off Donkey Kong for the Atom or bundle the game with the system. However, Nintendo never could close the deal with Atari, even though they were awfully close. the North American video game market was crashing, causing Atari's profits to plummet. To add insult to injury, General Computer Corporation was developing a new system for Atari, the Atari 7800, which was originally planned for a release in the summer of 1984. 1 month after the summer CES show, Ray Kassar was accused of insider trading, and although he was cleared, he was also terminated from Atari, thus setting the deal back to nothing. While Nintendo continued to look for ways to distribute the Famicom outside of Japan themselves, Atari, despite their financial troubles, still obtained the rights to port Mario Bros. To their home consoles and PCs. They released Mario Bros. For the Atari 2600 in December of 1983, just in time for the holiday season. The Atari 5200 version wouldn't see a release until February of 1984. Now this is where this interesting commercial comes in.
Something's coming up the plumbing, poor Luigi's in a bind. Giant turtles out to get him, creepy crabs are right behind. Fighter flies, jeeper shikes, they're all coming out the pipes. Mario, where are you?
No doubt one of the best video game commercials I've ever seen. A jingle sung to the tune of the theme song to Car 54 Where Are You? Too bad they showed off the 5200 version. I prefer the 2600 version, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's take a look at the Atari 2600 version of Mario Bros. Mario Bros. Would be the last of 5 Nintendo titles released for the Atari 2600, the first 4 being Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., Sky Skipper, and Popeye. This was the only one of the 5 released by Atari, the others having been released by Coleco and Parker Brothers. The port was programmed by Dan Hitchens, whose previous works on the 2600 included a port of Berserk, Sword Quest Earthworld, and Gravitar. Mario Bros. 2-player mode is still intact, and Atari did a good job of keeping it that way. Mario and Luigi sprites are a vast improvement over Mario sprites in the Atari Donkey Kong games. And what's more, Mario looks a lot better on the 2600 than he does on the 5200. The coins, however, look more like rainbow-colored wafers, while the POW block is more of a mere rectangle. The shell creepers look a lot more like actual turtles. Not much to say about the other enemies. Despite these sorry-looking visuals, the gameplay is still accurate. The Atari 2600 version sold well over 1 million copies, making it a big seller, but it wasn't enough to get Atari out of the red. After all, even the arcade game came out during the era of the crash, so the console versions ended up being discounted a great deal, along with pretty much everything else. Nevertheless, Atari continued licensing Mario Bros. For their platforms into the late 80s. In 1984, Jack Tramiel purchased a majority stake in Atari's consumer division from Warner Communications for $240 million, and it was renamed Atari Corporation. 2 years later, Atari re-entered the console market with the Atari 7800 to compete with the Nintendo Entertainment System, as well as a smaller version of the Atari 2600 for budget gamers. They also reissued Mario Bros. For the 2600, and after Coleco's license to Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. expired, Atari Corp bought the rights and reissued the ports. The 3 Nintendo games also got ported to the Atari 7800 in 1988. Mario Bros. Was a vast improvement over both the 2600 and 5200 ports. It almost resembles the NES version in practically every way. The only issue here is the sound. Oh god, the sound. Had this cartridge been made with a Poke chip, the sound would have done a lot better. The same goes for the other Nintendo ports on the 7800. Mario Bros. Was later implemented into Super Mario Bros. 3 as a battle minigame, with the Spinies replacing the Shell Creepers. In 2001, Nintendo released the Game Boy Advance, a 32-bit successor to the handheld Game Boy. Among the launch titles was Super Mario Advance, which included enhanced ports of the 16-bit version of Super Mario Bros. 2 and Mario Bros.
Mario Brothers!
The port of Mario Bros., known as Mario Bros. Classic, was given many improvements, including a sewer-like background as well as background music. Mario and Luigi are also given the ability to do a power squat jump, similar to Super Mario Bros. 2. They can even pick up the POW blocks like they do in Mario 2. In 2-player mode, players can also lift each other and throw them. This port would eventually carry over to other Super Mario Advance games, as well as Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga. The Famicom or NES port got released on the GBA in Japan as part of the Famicom miniseries, while North America got a port for the GBA e-reader. The e-reader version can also be utilized in Animal Crossing for the GameCube by connecting a GBA with the e-reader to the GameCube. In Super Mario 3D World for the Wii U and Switch, after you defeat Meowser in the final stage, you unlock Luigi Brothers, a remake of the NES port of Mario Brothers, with Luigi replacing Mario. Very cool. In addition to all these ports, Mario Bros. Was also referenced in many Nintendo titles, including the WarioWare and Super Smash Bros. Series. Overall, Mario Bros. Was a massive success, and it's still going strong today, even after 40 years. Despite the video game crash of 1983, Mario Bros. Managed not only to pull through, but bring Nintendo, Mario, and ultimately the whole video game industry to new heights. It permanently established Mario as a plumber, as well as his brother Luigi. Of course, the same also goes for the Shell Creepers, who would eventually become a staple in the Mario franchise under the name Koopa Troopas. Yes, you can say what you want about the Mario Bros. Game & Watch, but that was small potatoes compared to the actual arcade game and its console and PC ports. The Mario Bros. Arcade game made Luigi a star, along with his brother. Of course, for about 5 years, he'd remain a palette swap of Mario. It wasn't until the release of Super Mario Bros. 2 in North America that Luigi finally got a new design to distinguish him from his brother in-game. But his modern style actually made its debut 6 months earlier on the artwork of Famicom Grand Prix 2 3D Hot Rod. As for myself, I first got into the game when I played the Battle Mode minigame in the 16-bit version of Super Mario Bros. 3, and I had a lot of fun with it. When I got my Game Boy Advance and a copy of Super Mario Advance in 2001, Mario Bros. Classic really got me into the arcade game. I loved the concept of knocking enemies off platforms to clear the plumbing, and the bonus levels kept motivating me. Mario Bros. Would eventually spawn the release of Super Mario Bros. In 1985, a platformer that would change the video game industry forever. But that's all a story for another time. Thanks again for watching Gaming Delight. Until next time, happy gaming!